11th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there's a stench because he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Grace to you and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You may be seated. Well, as we gather for it's like a community memorial service. I know it's not, but it always kind of feels that way, because that's partly why we're here, is for us to remember all those folks who've gone before us, all the different generations, and all the different people. And I think that is a good thing, because church is one of the few places that we can talk about death, hopefully openly, and hopefully honestly. It's one of the few places we can also come and remember joyfully that we will at least get to see all of those folks again one day. Now, it comes up regularly, and many of you have crossed this bridge over and over. I know that you have, because we've had conversations. The proper way for us to grieve and the proper way for us to mourn the loss of someone. And I think that's part of the wonderful blessing of this text, is that we see that a good Christian response to death, well, if we follow Jesus and his way of being in the world, he was deeply moved, he was sad, it even says he cried. And we're talking about the creator of the universe, who was there before the beginning, cried at the death of his friend, at the sadness of his sisters who were left behind. And it seems to me that is a huge gift to the church and to all people everywhere. It's okay for us to grieve. It's okay for us to be sad. It's okay for us to have a heavy heart. All of those things are okay. Now, where it gets a little interesting is the little snip that happens right in the middle of it. In the middle of all the grief, and we get this beautiful visual, Jesus and Lazarus' sister and all the folks upset, except for one or two who say, well, he saved others, like the blind guy. Why couldn't he keep this guy from dying? That may sound kind of snotty, because it is. But it's not totally unlike things maybe we've said to ourselves, maybe a little more quietly. That is, I remember when I was just a youngster, and I read this story, and I thought, well, he brought, and all the different miracle stories, he brought Lazarus back to life. There was a young man and a young girl and different people. Well, why didn't he bring my loved one back? That was a huge question, and that was a huge issue for me, because if he could do it for them, I feel like those people. If he could do it for the others, what is this pick and choose business? And it was borderline crisis for me. I asked my pastor about it, got a less than satisfactory answer, so don't come to me. Not really. It was really disturbing to me. And just so you know, there's a whole discipline built around that very question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering in the world? It's a whole huge, gallons and gallons and tons of gallons of ink have been spilled on this very subject. Why does stuff like that happen? And it seems to me that we could go there, but the better place for it to go, I think, is if we follow our text, is maybe the better question is, what was God's response? What has God's response been to death, to suffering, to pain, to hurt, to all those things we all experience one time or another? You know, what was God's response to all of those things? Well, in our text this morning, I mean, I know, me too. It's so simple that sometimes I think we miss it. But God's response to death and suffering was to become a live human being and to be present with us in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the death. Did you notice that all the people, this is one of the most unlikeliest of places that we would expect to see God in the flesh. That is, all of them gathered around a tomb. All of them gathered around this scene of death. All these people are surrounded in this one place that normally is a very sad place, and yet there is God in the flesh. And the good news, it's good news after good news, it seems, but the best news of all, it seems to me, is that when he calls out Lazarus, and Lazarus responds, what we get from that, God's response to death and dying, it seems to me, and all the sadness, is that we can hear God's voice on both sides of the grave. Think of that for just a moment. That is some incredible theology, and I didn't make it up. It's right there for you to read again. Right there, the living could hear Jesus, and apparently so could the dead. So that, and in John's Gospel, the really important part of the miracles in John's Gospel, all of them, not just this one, all of them, is they point to that age-old question. They're not just miracles for the sake of having a miracle and having a good day. That's not what John's Gospel is very pointed. In all of his Gospel, they're really called signs, S-I-G-N-S, signs. They're signs of who Jesus really was. They're signs of what Jesus was really about in the world. They're signs of God's heart in the flesh. They're signs of what God intended for all humanity since the very beginning. And in this particular instance, the sign that Jesus is bringing about. So the question is, why does he pick and choose? That's the wrong question in John's Gospel. The question is what does this sign point toward? Or whom, better? It points always back to Jesus. And in Jesus, we find over and over and over that there's always new life. In Jesus, there is life. Even from the tomb, where there's only death and decay and stink, there is life. New life. And there's all kinds of things that come out of that tomb when Jesus calls. We could go there and spend the afternoon. We're not, and you're welcome. But I really want you to think about that as the day progresses. What is God calling out of that tomb? I mean, what is God calling us out of? What part of our death is God calling us back into life? And let me just start here with partly the mission of the church, because there's a reason that after this miracle occurs, this sign in John's Gospel, after this happens, there are people who probably believed in Jesus more deeply than they had ever imagined that they possibly could. But there were also people there who, following this miracle, after seeing with their own eyes, were determined more than ever to have him killed. Why, would you ask, would they want to do that? I am glad you asked, because they didn't like it. They didn't like it that someone could call someone from death into new life, because Lazarus was a nobody. He wasn't Caesar. He wasn't even one of the elite. He wasn't even in the right race. He was the wrong person altogether to have God care 2 cents about. Much less Mary and Martha, who were also, besides the wrong everything and living in the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong place in history, were women, if you can imagine. Why on earth would God care anything about a woman? I'm in the ancient text. I hope you're all tracking. Because that's how they thought. And that's really how they thought. Not that there aren't people who think like that today, but they really were back then. It's well documented. So for Jesus to call out a no one from nowheresville, a nobody, to such a strong sign to point toward who he is sending a very powerful message, and that is that God values and puts meaning and worth on every single living soul there is. Not everybody likes that. Jesus put value in Lazarus. There's value to his life. Not everybody liked that. So what do we do with that? Well, because that sounds real sweet, and we can have tea and crumpets and talk about that, but it's hard to live out. Let me tell you how. This past week or two, we've seen a lot of horrific things. And let me ask you, what is the loving response? We've had some really bad stuff happen. We've had, well, and not just all bad, it's really interesting. Well, the really worst thing was the shooting at the synagogue, of course, at the Tree of Life Synagogue. I think we'd all agree that's bad. Okay, as the people of God, what is our loving response? How do we respond to that? Okay, that's a huge question. There was, I don't know if any of you are tracking this, but the Matthew Shepard, the young man who was brutally murdered, was laid to rest at the National Cathedral. Not everybody liked that, but it was a really moment in our history as a nation. And that happened, and not everybody's happy about that. But the point is, what is the loving response to his family? What is the loving response to that whole thing in general? Of course, we have this caravan coming up, and I'm not going to get political because I really want you to think instead, I want you to really press this in your own imagination. What is the loving response, whatever it is? Whatever you think about those folks, wherever you are, what is the most loving way, as human beings who have value and worth, what is the most loving way that we can handle that whole occurrence? And it may not be what everybody else wants. It may not be, all I'm asking is suggesting is there's a loving way to handle every single human being that we come into contact with. There's got to be. There's got to be a loving way to respond. It doesn't necessarily mean what you're hearing on the news. I'm just suggesting that those are some critical questions for the times that we live in, and that is the reason they killed Jesus. Because not everybody liked it, that he put value on everybody. But if there really is value and worth on every living soul, we have to figure out the way to respond to that. As people in the 21st century. We have to figure out what is the most loving way that we can deal with whatever circumstance comes up, and there's going to be lots more. You just in your own daily lives. When people are mean to you, when people bully you, and it happens to adults, same as it does youngsters. What is the loving response? That's an awful question. That's a horrible question. But we've got to face it, and we need to answer it as the people of God. There's always a loving way. There is always a loving way. All this matters only if you believe that one little line in the gospel lesson. That when Jesus called Lazarus from the grave, there's an interesting little line in there that often, this week it has been with me every single day this week. It's after Jesus called Lazarus, the line goes like this, and the dead man came out. If you really believe that, if you really believe the dead man came out, and I do, with every fiber of my being. I mean, I know there's some stories, scripture that are up for grabs on different things, but this is one of those instances where I truly believe that every fiber of my being, the dead man did come out. And because he came out, I have to think about every way that I respond to every circumstance, and I know I don't always get it right. I know that sometimes as a community we don't always get it right. I know sometimes we do. But there's a reason we all needed a Savior. Because we needed someone to point the way. We needed a cloud of witnesses to show us the way. There's a reason we're all sitting in this room today. It didn't happen by accident. There's a huge group of people that had just even more difficult challenges than we could ever possibly imagine than what we're facing in the 21st century that brought us to this point because of their faithful and loving responses to all those horrible circumstances that we have to face. Because of all of these people, we're here. And now it is our turn. How are we going to respond? How are we going to be loving to everyone? Because the dead man came out. Amen?
Amen.
May the peace which passes all human understanding keep all of our hearts and all of our minds in Christ Jesus our Lord.
Amen.